Hey, what's up, guys? Welcome to the channel. At UFC 285, Jon Jones versus Ciryl Gane. We saw an amazingly stacked card that delivered in terms of excitement. We saw a lot of important matchups with a lot of name value, and we learned quite a bit about all the different fighters on UFC 285. And this video is going to be my top 3 takeaways from UFC 285. I have some honorable mentions, then I'm going to go from 3 to 1 in order of importance. And this is a video series I've been thinking about doing after every single UFC pay-per-view. So at the end of this video, let me know down in the comments, is this something you want to see me continue to do after every single UFC pay-per-view? Now, before I get into any of my list, comment down below what were some takeaways that you had from watching UFC 285. I'm curious to hear your opinion before I even get into my opinion, so let me know down in the comments. Now, starting off with the honorable mentions, and honestly, I could have made like a top 10 list for UFC 285, but I wanted to keep it to a top 3, but I have a couple honorable mentions I want to mention really quick. And the first honorable mention that I have is that Valentina Shevchenko has become complacent. She's been dominant for so long. She's on such a long winning streak. She's only really lost to Amanda Nunes in recent memory, which wasn't even recent. And I believe that she has become complacent. When you're on top for that long, at some point you start to get less motivated. And I think Valentina Shevchenko has, become demotivated. I think she goes out there, she thinks the win's already in the bag. And she goes out there, she throws a few leg kicks, she pumps the jab, she gets a takedown, she doesn't really work on top. And I think Valentina Shevchenko, because of the years of just defending the belt and not having any problem, I think she's become complacent on top. And I think that is exactly why Alexa Grasso was able to get that rear naked choke. Why is Valentina Shevchenko throwing a spinning back kick to the body when Alexa Grasso was literally crowding her, right in her face? It was a horrible decision. And I think in this fight, it showed a lack of aggressiveness. I think she was coasting. And I think it's because of the complacency of being on top for so long. Next up, we have Bo Nickal. And I just did a video about Bo Nickal and Jamie Pickett, about Bo Nickal potentially cheating in the fight. I'll link that video down in the description if you want to check it out. But even though this was a short fight, and even though Bo Nickal got the win and he finished him in the first round and really wasn't touched, I learned in this fight Bo Nickal has more work to do than I could even imagine, because the shadow boxing that he had in the cage where he was like throwing punches but Jamie Pickett wasn't even near him, then he threw a head kick and slipped and fell. He looked so uncoordinated in the striking compared to other, really good strikers within the UFC. So the striking we already knew he had to work on, but also, the big thing about Bo Nickal is his wrestling ability and his ability to get submissions. The arm triangle attempt was honestly just didn't look good at all. He stayed in full mount. Pretty much everyone knows at this point in time, whether you train jiu-jitsu or not, and I know he finished it in mount eventually, but he did not get to side control and start rotating to get the pressure that he needed to get the tap from Jamie Pickett. He just held on to the arm triangle from mount, eventually got the tap, fair enough, but he showed the inexperience in this fight, and he has a lot of work to do. He's talking about Khamzat Chimaev. He's talking about Alex Pereira. He's talking, about, Israel Adesanya, and I just don't think he is anywhere close to competing with the elite of the elite in the middleweight division. And I think the hype for Bo Nickal is entirely too high, and Bo Nickal is massively overrated at this point in his career. Moving on to another honorable mention. I have 3 honorable mentions, then I'm going to get into the actual list. I'm just going through these briefly. Is that Ciryl Gane is overrated. And a lot of people, when they hear overrated, they think, oh, I'm saying they're not good. I am not saying that Ciryl Gane is not good, but he is massively overrated in the heavyweight division because of his footwork. Because you look at Ciryl Gane, he only has 13 pro MMA fights. He only had 12 pro MMA fights going into the Jon Jones fight. He is inexperienced. He has an okay heavyweight resume, but the heavyweight division is lackluster to begin with. And Ciryl Gane, and I talked about this going into the fight, but this was just further cemented after Jon Jones' performance and dominant win over Ciryl Gane. Ciryl Gane now has gone from a position where he's #1 contender to now, I don't like his future within the heavyweight division. You look at Stipe Miocic. Stipe Miocic is going to out-grapple him, take him down, beat him up. You look at Curtis Blades. Curtis Blaydes is going to out-wrestle him, take him down, beat him up, maybe submit him. You look at, Tom Aspinall, who hasn't returned. We'll have to see how he looks after coming back off an injury. I think Tom Aspinall defeats him. Look what Tom Aspinall did to Alexander Volkov. You even get down the list even further. Sergey Spivak. I would pick over Ciryl Gane at this point. And I think a lot of people looked at the fancy footwork, looked at the very technical striking ability of Ciryl Gane, and forgot about the inexperience of Ciryl Gane. And I think going into that fight, a lot of people were picking Ciryl Gane. They thought he was going to be able to keep it standing, defend the takedown. We saw what happened against Francis Ngannou. Francis Ngannou had a bad ACL. He had a torn ACL, and he was able to easily out-grapple Ciryl Gane. And Jon Jones went out there and treated him like a baby and showed that Ciryl Gane is still relatively inexperienced. And I don't even like his future in the heavyweight division. I don't. I just went over all those guys that I think beat him. He's going to have to drastically improve in the wrestling and jiu-jitsu if he wants to be successful at heavyweight. And I don't know, how long it's going to take him to close that skill gap. But I think a lot of people were overrating Ciryl Gane's wrestling and his jiu-jitsu and his submission defense going into this fight. And I think it was exposed by Jon Jones even more than it was exposed by Francis Ngannou at their fight last year at UFC 270. Now, moving on to the list, starting off with number 3. The number 3 takeaway I have from UFC 285 is that Cody Garbrandt's career is over. I know Cody Garbrandt, we talk about, he's been KO'd so many times. He's lost, going into that fight, he lost 5 out of his last 6, and 4 of those he was brutally KO'd in. And a lot of us were focusing on the Trevin Jones fight. Cody Garbrandt, don't get KO'd. You can't get KO'd in this fight or your career is going to be over. And he went out there and won a decision. But I think this was a terrible look. And if anything, I think Cody Garbrandt's stock went down. Because Trevin Jones is a fringe UFC fighter. He does not even belong in the UFC. I believe the UFC literally re-signed him to take on Cody Garbrandt. And I understand that Cody Garbrandt has gotten put out so many times. He has an off button right on his chin, and I understand he has to be defensively responsible. He looked okay in the first round. He was throwing good body kicks, good leg kicks, landed some shots. But the second and third round, Cody Garbrandt was just, completely done. And in the third round, he almost got finished by Trevin Jones. Had Trevin Jones been more active on the feet, thrown more shots, I think he could have beat Cody Garbrandt. And the fact that he's barely squeaking out a decision against Trevin Jones, and I know that's a bit of an exaggeration considering Cody clearly won the first 2 rounds, but he's coasting in the third round. He almost gets finished at the end of the third round. I think his career's over. And I know, and I will give him a little bit of a pass because supposedly he injured his neck early on Saturday. I don't know, is he doing cartwheels in his hotel room? How do you injure your neck the day of the fight? That's crazy to me. But I will give him a little bit of a pass for that. But if you're barely squeaking by Trevin Jones, you're in the most stacked division in the UFC. I can't see him ever having that career resurgence that I've said Cody Garbrandt's a very skilled fighter. It's just the chin that's an issue. He's fighting like he's scared to fight. He's fighting like he's so terrified of getting KO'd again. And I don't know if that, in his mind, he will ever be able to get over that. And I don't think he's going to compete. Imagine him versus Petr Yan. Okay? Imagine that. He would get brutally finished, in my opinion. And you look at the division in general, the division is just stacked with absolute killers. I think Merab would KO him. I think Aljamain Sterling would probably KO him. I just don't think in the division that is so stacked as the bantamweight division, I think hopes for Cody Garbrandt ever having, ever even going back into that top 15 is unlikely, because who are they even going to match him up with next? Because even if you look, you look at the bottom of the division, you're looking at, Adrian Yanez, you're looking at Chris Gutierrez, Umar Nurmagomedov. I don't think he has a chance in any of those matchups. So he's going to have to keep fighting bottom of the barrel UFC fighters until he gets his confidence back. I just think Cody Garbrandt showed at UFC 285 it is the end of his career as we know it, as a contender within the bantamweight division. Moving on to number 2, my number 2 takeaway from UFC 285 is that Shavkat Rakhmonov is the real deal. We wondered going into this fight. He had 16 wins, 16 stoppages, a couple decent wins in the UFC, a win over Neil Magny, a win over Colston Harris, where he looked phenomenal. But we needed to see that test. We needed to see that Khamzat Chimaev, Gilbert Burns type test for Shavkat Rakhmonov. And we finally got it against Jeff Neal. And there's some people saying, oh, Shavkat got exposed in this fight and, he ate a lot of damage and he's defensively irresponsible. Shavkat showed that he belongs with the top tier of the welterweight division. Sure, did he show some holes in his game? For sure. But he went out there against a guy like Jeff Neal, who is an elite level welterweight fighter, and he faced adversity, and Shavkat just showed so much of his skill set. Amazing in the clinch. We already knew that, but against lesser competition. He looked amazing in the clinch against Jeff Neal. Those knees to the body were unbelievable. The durability of Shavkat. Shavkat ate some very hard shots from Jeff Neal in this fight. And also, one thing that is a massive takeaway that I always wondered about Shavkat because we hadn't really seen it. The stamina of Shavkat Rakhmonov is my biggest takeaway in terms of him being the real deal. Because even though he got the finish, it was at the end of the third round. So Shavkat went out there and had a crazy fight with Jeff Neal where the pace and the volume of striking was unbelievable. And he didn't get tired at all. And he mixed in the attempt at the takedowns. There was a lot of clinch work. He ate a lot of shots. He had some damage on him as well. And he did not fade. And he did not start to get tired. He did not start to waver at all. And in the third round, even after he's won the first 2 rounds, he's still looking for the finish. I think it was in the last 2 minutes of the third round. And he found the rear naked choke on Jeff Neal. This proves that the hype behind Shavkat Rakhmonov is real. It proves that he belongs towards the top of the welterweight division, and I cannot wait to see who he fights next. I favor him over a lot of guys in the welterweight division. Sure, does he have to shore up those holes as far as his defensive striking if he's fighting a guy who's a massive power puncher? Of course, he can't continue to eat shots like that, but he showed he is as well-rounded as we thought he would be, and he looks so good against a very good Jeff Neal, and he proved that the hype was real behind Shavkat Rakhmonov. I think this was a very interesting fight on paper. I'm glad that it got rescheduled because it got canceled in January, and Shavkat proved that he really does belong at the top of the division. Moving on to my number one takeaway from UFC 285, and this is kind of 2 of them kind of rolled into one, but that is that Jon Jones is the unequivocal GOAT of the sport. He is the greatest of all time. And also, we may not have that much longer with Jon Jones, so we might as well enjoy it while it lasts. Because Jon Jones, I've talked about it, ad nauseum for the last 2 months. And I've talked about it since I started my channel anytime I was asked about Jon Jones. Jon Jones, people like to go back and play revisionist history with Jon Jones' resume. But the fact that he was taking out guys like Rampage Jackson, Lyoto Machida, Rashad Evans, so on and so forth, Gustafsson, DC, people like to look at it now and say, oh, well, that wasn't that good of a run, blah, 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 blah. At the time, he was taking out the elite of the elite in the light heavyweight division, and he was winning. And then he took out Daniel Cormier, who eventually went up and won the heavyweight championship himself. And I believe Jon Jones was the GOAT before this fight against Ciryl Gane. But there was, you have the PED accusations and the positive test, not just the accusations. And, you have, all those where you can look back on and say, okay, does that put an asterisk next to his name? And yes, you could still say I disqualify him from being the GOAT because of that. But if you forget about all that outside stuff, you forget about all the out of the cage stuff, the PED, the positive test, and, supposedly you saw to change the rule where those were such low levels that he wouldn't even been flagged for testing positive at this point in time. You look at his resume at light heavyweight, absolutely incredible. And now he's come up to the heavyweight division and snatched the heavyweight title against the number one contender. And not only that, I don't even think just that is what proves it, but the fact he did it with such ease. He made Ciryl Gane look like Ciryl Gane did not even belong in the cage with him. He went out there, took him down. He landed some good shots on his feet. I thought he looked very good on the feet as well. People haven't mentioned it because he took him down after like 45 seconds, a minute, and then eventually gets the submission a minute later. So a lot of people aren't talking about the strike. He landed some good shots. He outstruck Ciryl Gane on the feet, landed the better shots before the takedown. But the fact he made it look so easy just cemented the fact that he is the greatest of all time. And now he can claim, I was a 2-division champion. And now he's going to take on Stipe Miocic, who a lot of people consider the UFC heavyweight GOAT. And this is kind of where we get into, we might not have much longer with Jon Jones, because the way he was making it seem like I may fight Stipe Miocic, really cement my legacy, take out who people consider the greatest UFC heavyweight of all time. And then people would probably say, well, now Jon Jones is the greatest heavyweight of all time in the UFC. And then he may retire, honestly. He's probably got more than enough money. And if he beats Stipe Miocic, there's no doubt he's going to get a massive paycheck from the UFC in terms of pay-per-view buys. He gets pay-per-view points. He probably got massive amount of money from pay-per-view sales for this Ciryl Gane fight. I think it was one of the biggest fights the UFC has done in the last few years. And I think he's going to get these 2 paychecks back-to-back. He's going to beat Stipe Miocic. Well, at least that's the plan for him. And I believe, for early prediction, I believe that Jon Jones will beat Stipe Miocic. And then he's going to say, well, what else do I have left to prove? What am I going to fight? Sergey Pavlovich, Curtis Blades? Now, I would personally love to see this matchup. I would love to see him sit around and defend his belt, defend the heavyweight title. But I don't know if that's going to happen. I don't know. He's getting up there in his late 30s. And the heavier divisions can have a longer career longevity. But I just don't think he's going to be a guy that's all of a sudden going to be like, okay, well, I beat Stipe. Now let me just hang around and defend it against guys who really don't have any name value. I think that's what he's going to be thinking in his mind. And I think the only other fight he may take would be if the UFC could get Francis Ngannou back. But I don't think the UFC's ever going to re-sign Francis Ngannou. Dana White said it himself. Now, that kind of makes me believe maybe he does get re-signed because Dana White said it, and we know how his history of saying things that end up being wrong or lies or ended up just becoming flat-out false. But I don't think they're going to re-sign Francis Ngannou. My gut's telling me that. And I don't know if there's any more real legacy fights for Jon Jones at heavyweight. And at this point, he just seems like he's intent on cementing his legacy, collecting massive paychecks, and none of these other guys in the heavyweight division are going to give him those massive pay-per-view buys. And I think you look at him right now, where he is in his career. He came back after a 3-year layoff, defeated Ciryl Gane. I think he's going to go out there, fight Stipe Miocic, and that may be what we see from Jon Jones in terms of his UFC career. So, he kind of answered some questions at the post-fight, and he was kind of saying, I at least got one more in me. And that leans me to believe that he may retire after defeating Stipe Miocic. Arguably at UFC 290, that's going to be International Fight Week. It looks like it's going to happen there. So we have to enjoy him while he's here, because forget about all the outside of the octagon stuff. He is one of my favorite fighters to watch, has been for very many years. He is the elite of the elite. He is so well-rounded. He has such a high fight IQ. And to watch him in the cage is just something to behold, honestly. And I know that sounds crazy, and it sounds like, oh, I'm a Jon Jones fanboy. But the skill level that he has just been, it's very rare to witness, Excellent wrestling, excellent jiu-jitsu, excellent submission game, excellent striking, unorthodox on the feet. And the fact that he's not a natural heavyweight, he moved up to the heavyweight division and he went out there and dismantled the #1 contender in the division. Just incredible. I don't know how much longer he's going to stick around in the UFC, but there are my takeaways for UFC 285. Let me know if this is something you guys want to see me continue to do after every single UFC pay-per-view. Let me know down in the comments what you guys think and what was your takeaways. Thank you so much for watching the video. Don't forget to like the video, and I will see you in the next video.